In this stage, we'll dig deeper into how AJAX works and look more at callbacks and response formats. But first, let's review the basics of AJAX. As you learned in the last stage, there are 4 steps to an AJAX request. First, create an XML HTTP request object. Second, create a callback function. Third, open the request. And fourth, send the request. Most of the fun and most of the programming happens in the callback function. A callback is the programming you want to run when the server sends back its response. It's the programming that does something with that response, like presenting a form successfully submitted message, or adding a list of new tweets to the page, or adding new tiles to a map. Each stage of the AJAX process, from creating an XML HTTP request object, to opening a request, to sending it, involves what's called a ready state. When a browser reaches a new step in the process, the ready state of the request changes. You create a callback that responds to a change in that state. Let's look at the code from the last stage. The function here is our callback function. It's also called an event handler. The event in this case is onReadyStateChange. Every time it fires, our function runs. The XML HTTP request object's readyState property holds a number from 0 to 4. The number represents each state of the AJAX request. The numbers 0 to 3 represent early stages in the AJAX process, from just after the XML HTTP request object is created, 0, all the way to when the response is coming, 3. But most importantly for our program is a ready state of 4. That's when the web server has sent everything it's going to send. In other words, the ready state change event fires off multiple times in the process of setting up and making an AJAX request. But we're only concerned when the ready state is 4. That's what the conditional statement here does. We don't want to do anything until we've received data from the web server. However, sometimes checking for a ready state of 4 isn't enough. There are things that might go wrong. For example, the web server can't connect to a database, or the web program handling the request crashes, or say the AJAX request pointed to a URL that's no longer around, so you get a file not found error. If there are errors like these, the web browser won't receive any useful information, and we won't be able to update our web page correctly. To handle possible errors, we can expand the conditional statement a bit by checking another property of the request object, the status property. The status property is a number sent from the server. 200 means OK and is the standard response for a successful HTTP request. Other numbers usually aren't good. 404 is the status for a file not found. You'll get a 401 response if you're not authorized to access a URL because it requires some kind of login or other permissions to access. A status of 500 pops up when the server has some kind of error. Often the server-side program that's processing the request isn't working. In our example here, any errors are quietly ignored. Nothing is printed to the web page unless we get a status of 200. But you can add programming if you want to deal with possible problems. To do that, I'm going to adjust the program here a little bit. And we'll leave our initial if statement, which checks to make sure that we got a response from the server. Then we'll do another check inside that. We'll see, is the status 200? If it is, everything's good and we'll print to our document. We can add additional conditional statements, checking to see if the status is a 404, which is a file not found, or check to see if it's a 500, which means that the server had some kind of problem. In here, I've just added JavaScript comments. But you could add real programming that would do something else. So for example, you could print to the page when there's a 500 error saying that there's a server problem, please try again later. Or if it's 404, you could print a message that says the file's not found, please contact customer service. Accompanying the status object is an explanation of the status. This is called status text. For example, the status text for a status value of 200 is OK. The status text for a value of 404 is file not found. You can use the status text as part of an error message that you display to the user. For example, you could pop up an alert message when the server returns anything but an OK or 200 status like this. I'll just get rid of all of this stuff and leave it with a single else and add an alert inside there. So basically, if everything's okay, we print to the page. Otherwise, let's pop up an alert box. To test this out, I'm going to go to our open method and change this to a page that doesn't exist, and then preview this. So now we see that not found is the response that came back from the web server. In some cases, you won't need to display any error message to your users. For example, say you added a small box in the sidebar of a page to display the current weather conditions. You create the small widget with data you receive from an AJAX request to a weather website. If there's an error in this request, simply don't display the widget. No one will notice that it's not there, and you don't want to distract your users with a message like, "couldn't get the local weather report." However, other times you might want to give the user feedback. For example, if you submitted form data using AJAX and you get an error, you probably should print out a message on the page like, "could not complete the form submission. Please try again." The AJAX example we've looked at here is pretty simple. So far, we've just received a small chunk of HTML and placed it on the page. But HTML isn't the most common data format for AJAX requests. More commonly, we will be receiving data in a format like XML, which we looked at in the last stage, or JSON, which I'll talk about next.